1:30, so we're going to go ahead and start, and I think as people on the floor hear a voice, they'll start wandering over. But we want to appreciate you being on time, so we're going to start right on time. My name is Tina Jordan. I'm the Vice President of Membership for FCA International, and it is my pleasure to welcome you today to the next in our series of Women in Cyber panels, brought to you by Women in FCA. This panel has qualified for continuing education units, so be sure to have your badge scanned. Bonnie Heater is in the back waving her hand. So Bonnie is a volunteer with the Fort Gordon chapter of FCA. She has the scanner, and she will be scanning you at the end. This session has to go 1 hour. There'll be time for questions. If it looks like we're not going to make it to the full hour, I suggest that you continue to ask questions because CompTIA certifies our sessions with the agreement that they will be 1 hour. So we want to honor that criteria and keep it at 1 hour. So in order to receive the continuing education, let's keep the dialogue going for the full hour. I don't think that'll be a problem, because we're scheduled for longer than that. We're scheduled for 1 hour 15, so it shouldn't be a problem. But if you do want the continuing education, make sure and see Bonnie in the back. Following this, when the things wrap up as far as sessions, not right after this session, but at 4:30, there will be a Women in FCA reception in the piano lobby in the Marriott. It's sponsored by Sienna and Walker and Associates. We have representatives from Sienna and Walker and Associates in the back. If you all could stand up and wave. They are your hosts for the reception this evening. We thank you very much for sponsoring the Women in FCA's reception. At the end of this session here, if you're getting your badge scanned, also see we'll have people in the back, Susan being one of them. Susan waves. We have drink tickets, and so as part of participating in today's session, you'll receive a drink ticket to go take it to the reception at 4:30. So you want to make sure and see the folks in the back with the drink tickets, and it's only one per person. Okay? So now I would like to introduce today's panel moderator, and that is Major General Jennifer Napper, U.S. Army retired. She's a Vice President at Unisys Federal Systems, leading all account management, solution delivery, and business growth activities for the Unisys Federal Organization serving clients in the United States Department of Defense and the intelligence communities. General Napper has been instrumental in building this panel, and we greatly appreciate her input and enthusiasm. In fact, all we did was recruit General Napper to do it, and she said, got it, I've got the panel, I'll recruit the folks, and we'll take it from here. So that was wonderful to work with you. We appreciate all that you've done for us, and I'm just going to turn it over to you to introduce your panelists. Thank you all.
Thank you, Tina. So thank you guys for coming over to hear a little bit about cyber and EW issues from some of the experts. I'm not an expert, I'll facilitate. Have a great panel today. I'll introduce each one and let them tell you a little bit about what they like, about what they do, or how they got to where they are, and they can introduce themselves. So I'm going to start with Jessica McCain. She's a very young AFCEAN, so she's one of the 40 under 40 awardees this year in AFCEA. We're very proud of her. That's actually how I met her. She was at the Baltimore event. We got to talking, and I said, I need her on the panel. So welcome to the panel. She's an IT and cyber intel analyst at U.S. Strategic Command. She actually worked her way through college in civil service, so she's been in the civil service for about 9 years. She's also got her bachelor's and her master's. So with that, we'll let Jessica kick off.
Wow. Again, my name is Jessie McCain. I work at U.S. Strategic Command. I'm a cyber threats analyst currently, but I have done everything from, I started in personnel as an intern and worked my way into our network operations office on the network defense team. And then as an SFS recipient, a National Science Foundation scholarship recipient, I had a government commitment follow-on, so I stayed at US Stratcom as a network defense analyst for the following 3 years, and then I'm in my current position now, and I've been doing cyber threats, dealing with emerging threats and insider issues for about 8 months. I'm really passionate about the people in the industry and how we respond as people in security and how the adversary operates, and just looking at how people work and how to respond in the best way possible. I'm fascinated with figuring out how we can work together to make the DoD stronger and across the whole government. So,
thank you. Welcome. So obviously my second panelist is Major Rodriguez, and she's up at the Cyber School. She's actually the Cyber Technical College Chief. So great background. You notice that she's wearing some strange brass, right? She actually came in from the Air Defense Artillery first, then she went to MI, and now she's cyber. So that is what the new cyber brass looks like. For those who haven't seen it, pretty impressive. Very impressive young lady, and we're looking forward to hearing what she has to say. With that, Juliana.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm going to start for how I got into this field and why I love it by telling a story of failure. So in high school, as a kid, I was always interested in computers, how do they work? So I signed up for AP Computer Science in high school, and I got into class the first day, and I'm like, I have no idea what they're talking about, and I don't have anybody to help me really figure this out. So I dropped out of that class, and then re-engaged with it in college. Majored in electrical engineering. Still things weren't quite clicking for me. Served 7 years in various positions in the Army, platoon leader, battery commander, and then had an opportunity to teach, to go get my master's and teach at West Point. So that was going to get me back into this field where I can figure out why computers are not magic. That was like the driving thing that I had as a kid. Why are they magic? Are they not magic? Why are they not magic? So I was able to get the master's degree and then teach at West Point and really figure out how to break down these subjects so that other people had that on-ramp that I never had when I was growing up. And try and make it as accessible as possible. While I've been at the school, I just switched over from tech college to the deputy director of training overall. So I'm still trying to adjust focus there and look at all of it instead of just the technical pieces. But I had the opportunity and pleasure and honor to be able to teach some of our outstanding soldiers on like how Python works and how different things, how can we problem solve in this domain instead of just kind of like doing things to check the block and then figure out, okay, did I do everything I'm supposed to do? But really, what's happening? How do I solve it for our nation?
Thank you. So our third panelist is Dr. Don Dunkerley. She's the chief of the cyber division in the G3 at Army Materials Command. There she's focused on operationalizing cyberspace to meet the commander's needs. Her PhD's in information systems from Nova Southeastern University with a doctoral focus in information security success within organizations. Dr. Dunkerley.
So I am honored to be here, and I will tell you, you may not see very many G3 cyber people, but I think you will start to see more and more of us in the future, because as we focus on operationalization, what does that mean? Bringing commanders, even the commander of Army Material Command, the visibility they need, the better decision making that they need through cyberspace using current intelligence. So that's what I'm passionate about. I actually come out of the G6 world. I started off doing information assurance, system administration, kind of some of the more practical aspects of the business that we do. And I had the opportunity to come over a few years ago and work within the intelligence community. And at that point in time, it hit me full on the threats associated with the work that we do on a daily basis. And I just never truly understood, while I was pulling cables under floors and pushing patches, what that meant. So that really, it made me a lot more well-rounded about the work that I do on a daily basis. A couple years ago, the G3, so at AMC we are the G3/4, and the G3 actually asked me to come over and lead up the G3 presence within AMC for cyber, which I was very honored to do. AMC is a massive, tremendously important command spanning from research and development, sustainment, logistics, you name it. And we really have a part in it with our partners across the Army staff and ASALT. So being fortunate enough to be involved from an operational perspective and having been given the chance to serve proudly within the 6 communities and the 2 communities, when General Morrison kicked us off yesterday morning talking about integrated operations and how do we come together, that's really why we're here. So I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you.
And last but not least, someone who probably needs no introduction to most of the folks in the crowd, I've got Colonel Laurie Buckout, or Laurie Mao as we used to call her. Retired Army Signal Colonel. I've known her for a few decades, and we'll let that go how many. Great lady. After she took her battalion and deployed in OIF, she came back and worked in the Pentagon on electronic warfare for the last 5 years? Yes, and now she's formed her own company, Corvus. She's the CEO and president of a company that's focused on electronic warfare capabilities. With that, Laurie.
Thank you. May I steal your mic?
You may.
It's good to see so many familiar faces out here. So I started off in 1984 as a signal officer, and then before I was kicked off to Germany for my first assignment as platoon leader in the good old Cold War days, I was one of the last officers to go through the radio systems officer course. Now, a lot of you guys don't remember RSOC. You went through it too, I think. But it was really the last course that taught officers about RF propagation theory, about antenna theory and patterns, and how transmission media works. So we stopped the course in 1985, too expensive, too long, and we made spectrum management into an NCO core capability. So having that background, then going right over to USAREUR and watching the Cold War and getting boned up on the then Soviet capabilities, what they're able to do, continued to interest me greatly. So kind of kept a toe in that world. Did OIF 1 as a battalion commander. They were just starting to kick off with IEDs and things like that. So came back and ended up in the Joint Staff, working for Lieutenant General Shea, and working with some folks who were doing Navy and Air Force EW. At the time, I thought an EA-6B was like a drone or a UAS or something. And I wasn't really impressed with the people who said, "Yeah, you fly a joystick." So learned later on, not that there's anything wrong with that. So learned later on that the real problem on the ground in Iraq was a problem of electronic warfare, of spectrum, of C2. JITR ran with it and kind of made it about exploding things, but in my mind, it's always been about spectrum. So that continued to be an area of interest. Got pulled over to the Army staff to kind of rebuild the Army's capability in electronic warfare. We kind of let it lapse. We were focusing on cyber, focusing on a lot of other things, the IED fight, learn to fight from FOBs, et cetera. But we sort of let that go. So since then, the Army has reinvigorated it, built an MOS, but I think some of the pivotal work happening in electronic warfare is actually happening right now. The people are bringing together electronic warfare, cyber, spectrum, intelligence, C4ISR capabilities, really seeing this as a holistic area that we have to integrate, I think is the true way of the future. So excited to talk about that today.
Great.
Come in.
So we met yesterday and talked over some of the discussions that were going on in the main ballroom from our senior leaders. And we decided to kick it off with a nice softball for the team up here. Yesterday there was a lot of talk about some operations that have been conducted against Ukraine in the last 3 or 4 years, or 5 years, depending upon who you talk to. I'd like to ask the panel, what lessons would you take from the operations and what you understand from it? And I'll start with Major Rodriguez.
Okay. I don't know if any of y'all were, I think a few of you were in the talk given by my colleagues at the cyber school yesterday. And one of the things that they were talking about with Ukraine was how it changes the nature of what we can trust. So if I can't trust some of the signals and things that I'm being told by my sensors, how do I operate? And it fundamentally changes the way that we have to look about protecting our systems and then being able to verify if the information that they're giving us is correct. Not only that, but I think it also changes the way that we should think about what this domain is, like cyberspace is, and how it kind of is like this other dimension, you know, how dimensions cross-cut each other. Because if we're looking at, let's say, cars and the car hack that was published a couple of years ago, if we have anything that is a digital system, there is a potential for vulnerability, and that's something that General Nakasone pointed out yesterday. So what I take away from that is that we need folks to get excited about getting into this field, getting into depth in this field, and then figuring out how to think better, faster than the adversary.
Thank you. Colonel Buckout, you had a follow-up?
So I think for me, just having studied foreign capabilities of EW is sort of my geeky area of interest. What I find most interesting about the Ukraine issue is how much we look like the Ukrainians. If you look at the block and line diagrams that the Russians had, the Soviets had, and that they still hung on to, you will see electronic warfare, signals, SIGINT, and cyber organizations at Army Group, at Regiment, and below from an actual control center size, EW control center that's bigger than a brigade at the military districts. They're able to bring capabilities that can emit, a couple hundred kilometers. They're not very mobile, but if you're going to fight from sanctuary, which is something the Russians are doing to a degree, you don't really need to be mobile. So they have a lot of force structure that we don't have, and we look just like the Ukrainians. If you bring up the armies, their little, block and line charts, they look like we do. Not a lot of formations to protect that sort of thing. So it's a very interesting study for us to see where our gaps are.
Anybody else want to follow up?
So from my perspective, I think what we've learned from these emerging events is that we have to move past simply compliance and start looking at true resiliency. What does it mean to be resilient? How do we make our people, our processes, and our technology more resilient against threats? And sometimes that's just simply knowing how to do business the way we did it before we had the reliance on information systems. So we have to start thinking about those things now and getting ahead of that threat instead of waiting until it happens, because then it's too late.
Thank you. Jesse, did you want to say anything?
I just want to echo Dr. Dunkerley, and along with that, we have to change the culture of security in general and move past, as she said, the compliance piece and checking the box and working towards that inspection to every single person in the organization has a responsibility for security, and we need to recognize that and train all of our users that what they do matters, how they use their computers, the Internet of Things matters and impacts the rest of the organization. So developing a culture of security rather than a culture of compliance, I think, is really key moving forward.
So start getting your questions ready. I only have one or two more, so you guys are going to have some questions here. And who's got the microphone for them? Okay, then we'll just count on you yelling when you're ready with a question. So, okay. So, everywhere you look, someone's talking about the shortage of the cyber-trained personnel, and in the news they're talking about, woe is the world, it's coming to an end, we need 100 million, cyber-trained personnel. How much do you think something like they were talking about yesterday in some of the presentations about automation and simplification can reduce that requirement? Any volunteers?
I will run down that rabbit hole. So we have to have cyber-trained personnel at various levels of our organization. So we will always need the Signal Corps. We will need cyber-focused intel. We need system admins. We're always going to need those people. Automation is going to maybe improve the way that we do patching and scanning and visibility, situational awareness. But we're always going to need a human in the loop who's able to conduct analysis and tell a commander, so what? This is why you should care about this. But furthermore, we need people from a logistics command to understand the cyber impacts and implications into logistics and sustainment and transportation. But until we actually have branched out from our own kind of narrow way of seeing things and bring everyone into the tent and have everyone understand, as we have grown more reliant on information systems, here are the impacts and here are the effects that you can create as a result of everyone's increased reliance on information systems. Only then will we have made that training leap that we have to make.
As far as automation goes, it will help improve our efficiencies and allow the skilled personnel to focus on bigger tasks and more complex things that require a human, but it's never going to replace the watchstander, the person who's there actually making the decision on whether or not this is real, this is a false positive, this requires more investigation, what have you. You can have all the alerts coming up to fill a screen, and unless you have someone looking and knowing what they're looking at to decide, it does no good. So we need the trained professionals there to actually interpret the data.
So what, as a follow-on, both of you made very good points. What do you think is preventing the DoD from moving to more automated patching of the networks?
Okay, I will
looks like
throw
Julianne
myself on
wants to
that
jump.
one first. So just to my opinion, for what it's worth, we have locked ourselves into a lack of agility. We have to really understand what we're acquiring. We have to move to standardization more readily. So a great example, the Heartbleed exploit that came out some time ago. IKEA was able to patch their entire infrastructure. Think about all the IKEAs across the world. I believe within a matter of 8 hours, the entirety of IKEA was completely secure against that particular exploit, which caused so much ripple effect across the world. And it simply is because they had invested in standardization across their infrastructure. Now, understanding we're a little bit more complex from a mission perspective than IKEA, but I think we have some lessons that we could learn from industry that might improve that for us.
Juliana?
Yeah, so I was going to mention, okay, if we think about New Jersey, we still have folks who have to pump your gas in New Jersey. It's illegal for you to pump your own gas in New Jersey, right? Why? Everybody knows how to pump their own gas. This is not the 1940s or 50s. So it's because it supports an economy that works for New Jersey. And in that sense, I'm thinking that a lot of organizations have to figure out what works for them. Going to an automated system is awesome and can be really, really helpful for a lot of organizations, but it may not fit every single one. And to do that is going to require a lot of culture change for the organizations that do it.
I think that's a valid point. Do we have our first question from the audience? Please, sir.
Thank you. Great panel. Talk about, in the session this morning, in the panel this morning, they talked about rapid capabilities acquisition, what that means in terms of tactical edge, responding to the COCOM and theater commander requirements, not trying to buy for big Army. Explain how you're looking at acquisition from a materiel side, from the bigger Army picture. How do you see that changing, given that you have to do so much more rapidly? You can't invest in 5-year programs the way you used to and expect to have that same level of agility and resiliency.
Okay, do I have a volunteer?
Well, I believe I'm the one who has material in my command name, so I have to jump on that one too. So that's a really tough challenge. You know, balancing security, resiliency, usability, and speed. If I had figured that out, I wouldn't necessarily be sitting here. I'd be running some organization somewhere. So I will tell you that the advent of the RCO is going to make a really positive step, giving you an opportunity to work directly with an organization built to do just that. But I won't lie, it's going to be a challenge how to field things that won't come back and cause harm at some point in the future is going to really be a challenge.
So I'll give you one example. I started working with some of the other professional service organizations in D.C. area to prepare a testimony for the 809 Commission, which is about acquisition reform. And the number one recommendation we have come up with, which is probably the same as everybody else in town, is use Part 12 of the FAR. So for those things that is COTS, acquire is COTS. So that allows your acquisition officials and the guys that have to go do the more complicated acquisitions to move downstream, right, and look at the other harder problems. What I mean by that is today we still require this whole long process to buy software, and then you take it through milestone whatever, and then you go get some con, and then you might be allowed to put it in a corner of the network, and 3 years from now, when they're on version 22 later, you know, so you got it, right? Use the FAR the way you're supposed to use it. Part 12 says there's a real easy process for COTS, and if it's good enough, it's being used all over the commercial world, you know, yeah, you need to do pen tests and validate the software. I got that, but the rest of that, you got to move away from. So that would allow and free up acquisition officials to really focus on the thorny problems, like the very complicated radio waves for downrange and how to make all that work in one small smartphone like General Funk wants, right? So that's my recommendation: is use the FAR to your advantage and educate the lawyers that keep telling us no about what the FAR really says. So that's my recommendation. Anybody else on the panel, please?
So when I first started working in the NOC at Stratcom, General Kaler was the commander, and one of his favorite questions to ask us was, how do we make our processes work at the speed of net? Today that question would be, how do we make our processes work at the speed of cyber? We still haven't answered that question 5 years later. We often focus on the process to get to the end state where you have this solution that is available now today, but it takes sometimes years to get that solution, and like everybody else is saying, by the time you get it, it's 3 years old. There's something new that you need to now go through the same process to get, even though it's already been approved for a previous version. So oftentimes our actual operational actions with those tools, in my case, looking at cyber threats and emerging threats, takes a back burner. We're focused more on getting the process, or excuse me, I'm sorry, I'm nervous up here, on working the process to get to our actual solution than actually trying to solve the problem.
Do we have another question? Please, sir.
Laurie, I'll point this at you, but I'd welcome anybody kind of jumping on the grenade. And since we want to make sure we get to an hour for credit, give you an opportunity to do a little storytelling kind of through the process. You and ma'am, you and others have lived through the air-land battle doctrine days of when we were division-centric. We thought about fighting in depth. We built CWE organizations, EW organizations at the tactical through operational level, you know, and really worked those things focused on targeting and fires and all. You saw that collapse. You were then responsible largely for this responsive action to the IED threat and that portion of the spectrum. You went through the tribal wars in the building and the cultural challenges we have between the tribes and resources and all. And now you're seeing that reemergence and that evolution and it really springing forward. I'd ask you to kind of take us through what you learned in trying to do something new and what you would recommend so that what we're doing now won't go through the same frictions and challenges that you had so that we can get to it quicker.
I love that question because, you know, honestly, I learned a long time ago that admitting fault is a really easy way to move on. The more you try to resist, oh, I was right, the more painful it gets. You know, I teach my kids, man, I screwed up. I teach them to say that because then I don't scream at them anymore and everybody's happy. So when we started the IED thing, I had the Vice Chief of Staff of the Army was General Dick Cody, who was a little dictator. And I love him to death, but man, he was a really interesting guy, but he got stuff done. So it's like, you're going to fix this EW thing, get it going. I want an MOS, I want a blah, 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 I wanted this. And when he would look up at me, because he's not very big, and give me that steely-eyed gaze, so I jumped. So I will say that I'm a bit of a dictator in a pink suit. So I started making things happen. I started, you know, pushing folks to do things. The Vice had the idea. I wanted to be fires. Roger that. So We pounded that square peg into that round hole until everybody screams. And we made some fires guys into EWOs, and the school at Sill was fantastic. At the time, a lot of the joint folks were doing EW as sort of a form of fires because that's how you fight from airborne platforms. So they would go in, they were interdicting and nullifying air defenses. They were defending and protecting very expensive fighter and deep strike aircraft. So you had your Growlers doing that, or your Prowlers doing that back in the day. Your EC-130s for the Air Force guys, but same difference. So, but we didn't really fight like that. And honestly, as much as we tried, we could never get senior field artillery leaders to pick it up and run with it. So lieutenant colonels got it, majors got it, colonels got it, but I could never get the senior folks to run with it. We shopped it around. I shopped it down here at the Signal Center. Vice sent me out. Said, go forth. Like a little minnow on a hook. Let's see what you can catch. So I went all around my little minnow, and I wasn't catching much. The Signal Center said that's not really our core competency. I was disappointed. Said, okay. The field artillery guys love the concept, but they have their own life of kinetics that they were just, of course, very involved in. They've been doing it for just a couple hundred years. And the intel guys at the time were very focused on just the cyber threat. So, and of course, all the intel gathering and the huge infrastructure that went into Iraq and Afghanistan. So first mistake was trying to shove a square peg into a round hole. I think as it matured, not looking at the echelonment that needed to happen. So we were trying to build some capability and get it out there. So I'll tell you, like I said, the Russians, they've got huge capabilities in sanctuary, at their military districts. They have not quite as huge capabilities, semi-deployable, and like at the halt, not at the quick halt, at Army groups. They have at the quick halt capabilities a little smaller, a little less distance stuff lower down, et cetera. So they have clearly echeloned capabilities. We have to get past the concept of fighting as a BCT and that every BCT has to be cookie cutter, because you are not going to be able to even get into the battle space with some of these little things like, you got a little Humvee mounted capability. That against some of the HEMET mounted, Russian HEMET, whatever that's called, capabilities that have, 150 kilometers on them, it's like spitting in a forest fire. So we really have to think more about how we fight. Senior leaders have to get involved. I will say, before I move on this one, a lot of senior leaders treat capabilities like this kind of geeky stuff as little cottage industries that you outsource to geeky people. The Russians don't do that, the Chinese don't do that, the North Koreans don't do that. The Russians fight it as a maneuver capability. So their whole army, from their most senior leaders, understand EW and cyber, and they build it into their scheme of maneuver, they build it into their O plans, they build it into their national military strategy. We do not do that. We say, I haven't met this chief, but having seen work for a lot of maneuver guys, it's like, Sigo, you handle that. I don't want to hear that damn thing ring again, Cyber person, just take care of that shit. I want to focus on maneuver. Cyber and EW are maneuver. And our senior leaders really need to understand that, embrace that, if we're going to be able to go against some of the near peers that are out there.
So I'll give you a slightly different version of the same story. So when I came out of the PACOM 6, they sent me to someplace called JTF-GNO. It doesn't exist anymore. It's been absorbed into the fort, the collective as we call Fort Meade, right? So at the time, there was this brilliant strategic command commander who said, you three little one-stars from the three different services are going to carry this briefcase through the entire Pentagon and convince everybody that cyberspace is a warfighting domain. And that's your primary mission in life. And so we had, you start with the deputy threes, and you get to see the threes, and they kick you back to the deputies, and you wordsmith, and you go through this whole process. But after about 6 weeks, you were seeing the vices, okay? And, we can fast forward, it's 10 years later, cyberspace is a warfighting domain, It's accepted. We're building forces. We're building capabilities, and life is moving on. It's going to take that kind of effort on the joint level in order to pull the electronic warfare back up to the same and be part of it. But it does happen, just nothing happens fast. Next question, please. Yes, please. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, as a follow-on to George's question, in your response to George's question, my observation is, as I travel around the world, that there's a lot of people that focus on the network side of cyber. Who is focusing on the RF side of cyber? That's one part of the question. And what do we need to do to get more people involved on the RF side of cyber? Because that is truly cyber attack. And two, what does the panel think about when and how spectrum is going to become its own domain?
So it's interesting because yesterday we talked about whether or not to throw that grenade on this table. So I'll start it and then I'll let the panel chime in and correct me. So on your first point, which had to do with the RF. So from my perspective, there's many different ways to deliver a cyber effect, okay? And it doesn't always have to be through a wire or through an internet or through pick a source, right? So the method of delivery is not as important as the package you're delivering and what it does. And you pick your method of delivery, from my perspective, based upon the opportunities and the circumstances you're in. Anybody else want to jump on that one?
No, I would just say it's going to end up being a requirement to train commanders to understand these different tools in the kit bag for them. As Colonel Buckhout, mentioned, and I wrote it down very carefully because it's something I want to remember forever. Don't outsource it. So if we're not going to outsource things, then there has to be some level of understanding for this at every echelon for every commander.
That's a good point. And if they begin to understand what they can do to others, what their non-kinetic effects can be, or even kinetic through the non-kinetic delivery, then they should be able to reverse that and say, then that also could be done to me, and now what do I need to defend against, right? And so that back and forth. Go ahead.
So Doc made the comment on resiliency, which is a word that I really like. And we were discussing that with General Frost and the Demo CY gang earlier this week, and building up a definition for cyber resiliency for the Army, which doesn't really have one yet. So we did some research around, and her team came up with the concept of electromagnetic spectrum as part of the definition to cyber resiliency, easy for you to say. Noticing that you have to be able to recover from network and EMS related threats in order to be truly cyber resilient.
So EMS is a domain. Just as Laurie was the last one to go through RSOC, I was the last Army officer to go through Keesler in the Frequency Management Spectrum Management Loan course. And it was a very interesting course, pretty much scoped for the Navy because they were so into HF and so reliant upon the whole spectrum. But it was a fascinating course that also made you sit and look at the propagation techniques and patterns of every single antenna at the time. Now this is 100 years ago because I'm old, but the fact was those physics haven't changed, right? Is it a domain? Yeah, I'm not there yet. I understand that some of the other folks in the joint world are buying off it's a domain, and I haven't grasped yet that you want to use that term for it. So we'll let someone else offer their opinion.
That is a great grenade, though. It is sure to incite violence and excitement everywhere it goes. For geeks, the joint world is sort of jumping on that. I have been a hesitant proponent in the past because when you think about a domain, you have to train, man, and equip to a domain. You look at the air domain, you look at the sea domain. We have specific forces to handle those domains. We have a cyber force to handle the cyber domain. We train, man, and equip. Almost a Title X sort of function to go after it. So how do you do that for the EMS domain? You know, is it brought out separately, considering it's a transport mechanism for almost everything we have, you know, except for some of our plain kinetic forces? How do you train, man, and equip to a transport capability? A lot of questions. I don't have the answers, but we're still going to grapple with that.
So that sounds like one we should continue during the piano lobby reception. Colonel Marcos, you had a question. So I think it's a good one. It takes a lot more dialogue. Good, thank you.
So I have a question on big data analytics. A lot of opportunity to get it right, because from my foxhole, knowing what we're funding, we're not doing a lot right now. And I know that the Chinese have it as a national objective to be the best in the world in big data analytics. So where should we be going as a service, as a DoD, or as a nation, seeing as how we have a chance to get it right, since we have a whiteboard that no one's written on, really, from my perspective?
So one of the organizations I was in recently had a whole data division, bunch of data scientists, and we have some at Unisys as well. It's for what? The ones we have in Unisys are working with the Custom and Border Patrol. So they're taking all the sensors from around our country and what's going on at all the borders and making sense out of that in seconds, so the border agent on the line can decide what he's going to do. So big data analytics for what? So that's what I'd caution you on, and I'll let it, please, I know the panel has some thoughts on this one.
I would say we are actually approaching it in some respects. To echo what General Knappers mentioned, for what? We are looking at it from a cyber threats perspective. We're looking at it from a network defense perspective. We're taking in indicators and trying to make sense of those indicators. But even in open source, there are thousands that come out every week. And that's a lot that one person just has to look at. Well, we're seeing some automated ways of doing that, and this is, again, it's going to tie back to where automation can help. If we have a solution that can take all of the information from every report, from every company that's putting out this data on indicators of compromise, to make it something that can be interpreted in just a few seconds by the analyst or the defender or the person who's actually having to take action on that data.
Dr. Dunkerley?
So I would go back to what questions does a commander have? What do we need to be answering for every commander, not just the cyber commanders? So, my CG is charged with moving materiel, transportation, research and development. If we harness the power of big data analytics to ask the right questions, where his operational risk is, what decisions do we need him to make, and areas we need him to influence. We have the data there. We just simply have to frame the right questions, and we have to get the operators in the room to ask them.
Major Rodriguez?
So my thoughts on this one is that we need more people willing to go there. So back to the point on don't outsource. Don't think that someone else is going to take care of this also. Like, if this is something that can really help us, then more people in the organization, instead of just like, oh yeah, somebody else is going to take care of figuring out how that software works so they can look at it and just provide me analysis. Like, is it really integrated the way like Intel and Ops need to be integrated for us to actually get after the end states that we have in whatever tactical or operational thing that we're doing? So if we find a way to communicate the value of big data in a way that everybody can understand, the commander and all the staff, that's how we can start to get that integrated into helping us.
You know, so kind of jumping on the capability, like what are you looking for? So I think right now the U.S. tends to bin big data analysis based on the target, what you're trying to find. So for instance, I have a team over at JIDO and the J6 over there, and we do big data analytics because we're looking for threat network indicators. So what we'll do is push tools to do big data analysis to the cloud, so the warfighter can say, you know what, I need to find X. I want to find guys who are bringing in fuses to, you know, blow up things. So they'll do combing and everything like that to find their thing. But it appears the Chinese are focusing on big data analytics itself as a task and making that the priority rather than the target of the things you're trying to find like we do, which is sort of interesting. I'm not sure it's a better way, but...
This one should be fun.
Well, I just want to say this is the best of any panel that I've seen in a long time on this subject or any subject, and I want to congratulate all of you. I was going to ask a leadership question, but you all keep coming back to that. How do we get this area of cyber and EW as an integrated function inside the brain of the combat leaders? But you're already doing that. What I want to ask, though, is a question that has to do with acquisition that is leadership related. Being in industry now, as I have since retirement, finding great COTS product that can have an immediate impact, it seems as though getting a COTS product introduced in scale and speed that it can have the desired effect is nearly impossible. And the reason is there seems to be in the government this culture of no. From like GS-13 on, it seems like everybody thinks I have the authority to say no and it shall not pass my desk, or at least stick it in the whole box for an indefinite period of time. How, in your collective opinions or individual opinions, do we invoke at leader level a culture of yes and no by exception? Because by definition, if it's a COTS product, it's successful somewhere in an environment that's almost identical to the one we're operating in, including EW, I might add, because the Internet of Things is 90% wireless. So spectrum has become a very real issue there as well. So, but the question is, how do we create in the minds of people to move things faster a culture of yes as opposed to what seems to be in the government a culture of no?
Do you have a volunteer to go first? All right.
So in trying to communicate things to folks, like, I've failed a lot. And I think that's an important point here too today, is that you have to fail before you start to figure out how to succeed. If you can't explain the value to what a person finds valuable, then it doesn't matter. Like, oh, there's this cool capability and, you know, it could help you out this way, but if it doesn't get at their core why of what they're leading, then they're not going to be interested in it. Even if it's cool, it just doesn't drive at the things that they need to care about and they need to focus on. So finding a way to align it to the interests of a particular commander, I think it's going to be a one-by-one sort of organization fight, if you will, to be able to show that value.
I'll follow up with it. The transition from government to industry is always an interesting one. And in our company, they require all of us go through leadership training. So I got an opportunity to go to a week up at our headquarters for leadership training. And the theme of the course was really, about leadership, but it was based upon getting to be a customer-focused person in industry, right? And so the discussions were always about, it doesn't matter if you have a beautiful tool. What's the pain? What are you trying to solve? So it was more important to go in and find out the pain points and then come back with a solution than it was to come in and say, I've got the solution and assume you understood the pain. So it was a great class. It was wonderful. But that, I think, is what you have to focus. What is the pain point? What are you trying to solve? And focus on that versus the specific tool. And then there's probably 2 or 3 that can be, go through a bake-off. Another question? Yes, in the back over here, please. I see you, boss. Get right back to it.
Great. So I have again, wonderful panel, ladies. I have a question, since we keep bringing up culture, and it goes back to what you mentioned about a culture of cybersecurity. So in the Six arena and a few other jobs, I've realized that sometimes I have to live in two worlds where I'm pushing cybersecurity, but I'm also pushing information sharing. And even General Funk mentioned recently about one of his challenges is he's bringing all these international officers on board, and he's being told that he can't get them to communicate and share information the way that he needs for them to do. So I'm just asking for your opinions on trying to jump that hurdle.
Balance the two. Please, from the panel first.
So that's a great question. That gets to the heart of a lot of our problems, I think, with a cybersecurity culture and moving past simply compliance. How have we integrated the intelligence community and our understanding of what the current threat is? So, in my opinion, as an intelligence professional, we have not done a good job of integrating what we know the current threat to be at every echelon, where the intern to the senior leader understand what the current threat is to them at any given point in time. We make better decisions when we are better informed. That being said, information sharing, certainly with the proliferation of capabilities, social media, everything that the internet has brought us to bear, information sharing now is more important than ever. I simply say having a better understanding of intelligence, threats, friends, the things that we, could be finding out through that community will help us in a lot of aspects in getting that more integrated into the general cybersecurity community. I'll close out by saying a great quote from a man I respect at the utmost, Lieutenant General retired Rhett Hernandez, used to say that people would change their behaviors if they understood that when we sit down at our computers that we operate in a congested and contested environment every day. So let's bring that to the people, and we will behave differently.
Jessica?
So, in general, in the industry or in the government, we all have a pretty good understanding of operational security and what that means. It didn't start out that everyone understood you can say this, you can't say that. Cybersecurity is very similar. The difference is the medium. You're not just talking about something or showing something physically or allowing someone to a building physically. You're looking at your computer as that domain. Cyber in general is the domain. So someone sitting down to their computer and going to an internet website, a forum, their social media website, they need to be taking those things into account. And I would say that's a part of our cybersecurity culture and our operational security culture. I think the two go hand in hand, and then when you're sharing information, you need to consider both, and that's how you marry the two up and make sure you can still share information, but be cognizant of who it's going to and who else might see it.
Two great answers. General Shea, you have a question for us.
Yeah, so I come here to Fort Gordon area, and I'm seeing a lot of great work the Army's doing. I'll go to San Antonio in October or November and hear a lot of great things the Air Force is doing. I'll go to West and San Diego in February, and I hear a lot of great things the Navy and the Marine Corps are doing. The question I've got is who is integrating all these areas so that you have a joint warfighting concept, and that we're not, particularly in the case of EW, but not just EW, when I look, I'm here, I see the term information warfare, information operations, different terms are rolled up into there. Who do you see, particularly you, Jessica, as a combatant commander representative, who is tying this all together for the joint force?
That's a great question.
That is
So we'll
a
let
great
you
question.
start, and then we'll let everybody else pile in.
So we have the construct of the joint cyber centers, and the intent of those was to unify everybody, try to get everyone on the same page, and they're the belly button for cyber issues for all of the COCOMs. Now that being said, every cyber center is a little bit different.
Yeah.
Yes, and at STRATCOM, because of our mission set, we handle EW as part of the Joint Cyber Center. That's not the case at UCOM and TRANSCOM. They look at it completely different. So I think the effort is being made. I don't think it's going as far as it could be. from a perspective of someone who is not anywhere near leadership, I'm an operator, an AO. We're trying to solve that problem right now. We're working with our peers at different COCOMs to try and figure out how to get the information, because there's a lot of times a meeting will happen with senior leaders and they're taking in so much information it never makes it down to us. And that's just the nature of how things go. So I think that communication and information sharing needs to be better across the board, and I don't know who should be the belly button, but I think the Joint Cyber Centers is a good place to start because they're already there in place, and that's what their mission is to be this information sharing construct.
So I'll answer the doctrinal answer, since you were on the joint staff. We said it's an operational domain, and that means this is J3's problem. Right? J3 handles operations, comes up with all the doctrine for that. And so it seems to me that while they partner with Cyber Command, who doesn't claim EW as part of their area yet, they might someday, and you look at some of the other areas that are merging the two together or have merged the two together, the Navy, it's all one career field, it can inform the J3 and help them figure out the right way forward. But it's going to have to be in the joint staff. Other questions? We have time for plenty more. Yes.
The comment earlier was about how in the past for technical subjects we have outsourced them to geeks and the commanders kind of distanced himself. As we all become more common users of technology and more dependent on technology, are we all becoming geeks? Are we on the path to becoming geeks? And if not, how much of a geek does the average soldier, sailor, airman, or Marine need to be?
So this is always the great debate, right? Do we use technology or do we understand the technology? All right, who wants to jump that one first? All right.
I don't see us becoming geeks and everyone becoming geeks and warfighters becoming geeks. I see these areas becoming more acceptable as, warfighting functions, as maneuver. If you're using EW to channelize an enemy, to herd him from one thing to another, to force him to act in a certain way, that's like fires, and maneuver commanders need to understand that. So I don't see as them getting geekier, I see these geeky subjects getting more warfightery.
But you broadened it a little bit, so let's see what Dr. Dunkerley has to say.
So to that point, some interesting work has been done through TRADOC, through the Unified Quest series. So they actually asked that question: are our children, ever since mine was old enough to sit up, he's been on an iPad, are they getting, smarter on the nuts and bolts of these topics? Are they just what they consider to be digital natives, people who understand technology and how to integrate it within their lives? And overwhelmingly, the consensus has been the future soldier, the future leader, is going to be a digital native, more likely to understand how to integrate these concepts within their daily lives, within their decision-making process, but they're not necessarily going to understand how it works. So we're always going to need the people who are geeky and hackery enough to get down inside of the nuts and bolts and actually understand how to defend and exploit those concepts.
Jesse?
So if we look at some of our adversaries and how they do recruiting, they're actually actively in their universities and participating in capture the flag events on the university level. And at my school, we had a capture the flag team. We would participate in these worldwide events, some of them held in Russia, some of them held in Iran and some other places. And come to find out, after you research the other teams, you find that there's actually military members on their teams. And they're being sponsored by their governments to do this. The Air Force Academy has their own team that does very well, but that's the only team that I know of that actually has a military group focused on that.
Real quick, West Point has one also,
and
they won last year.
They won one, yes. And
Beat Navy.
yes, well, I've been out of school for 6 years. That's good to hear. But my point is, we have the resources here, so outsourcing to another country, to another or agency isn't necessarily the answer. We need to figure out how to get those individuals interested in working for the government, whether it's in civil service, whether it's as a member of service. How do you get them interested in using their hacking skills for good? So it's not about making everybody a cyber warrior, but it's about attracting the right people who can be cyber warriors.
We have time for one more question before we start doing some wrapping up here on the panel. Who's got a question? Up in the far corner.
How you doing, Chief Stewart? This is great, by the way. I know as everybody said, I'll say it as well. This question is EW advocacy. Everybody's talked about EW advocacy. Leadership in EW advocacy. In the past, we put electronic warfare under the FCO. You explained that earlier. And now we're getting ready to put it up under the Cyber Center of Excellence. How, as a core competency, electronic warfare officer or technician or NCO, when you placed under FCO, we had the functional area officer. We did not switch those guys over to a branch. We did not branch them over. Now we're getting ready to place the officers again in cyber. They're going to become cyber officers and then switch over later on. If my understanding is that's how they're going to do it. Is that going to, I guess, water down as a core competency that officer's job in electronic warfare, and then affect that advocacy for EW later on? I guess I hope I asked that correctly.
So we're going to let the good majors start, and then we'll let other folks pile on.
So you're asking if moving the EW function into cyber is going to change the ability of the leaders therein to communicate what they do?
Or lose their skills.
Their
because
skills?
If they're learning cyber on the side, are they going to lose their EW?
Okay, so I think I can start this. I think what I hear you saying is that it is a lot of change, and it might be too much change in some cases. Well, and that's where we would challenge folks. You signed up to serve, and if this is what we need you to do now, we need you to do that. As General Nakasone said, adapt. So with that, there's a lot of folks who are spending time talking to EW in the field, what they're doing, who are also talking to ICO to see how's that different from what we have SIGINT do, for example. How can we make sure that we've got that chain all going across between intel to operations within the EMS? And now, how do we get them enough knowledge of what's happening on net and what they're doing, how what they're doing is going to be able to reach into and be informed by what's happening on net. So there's a lot of effort that the Cyber School is putting into trying to make sure what we teach is going to get that capability back to the EW folks.
Anybody else want to address? Okay.
So this is going to be a long and painful road. And I say that because we have not really conducted EW for a long time. We've done some great SIGINT work, some great collection work, but when it comes to actually conducting electronic attack and really doing EAESEP in a holistic manner, we as a nation or as an armed force have done very little of that since World War II. So the Russians have been doing it nonstop since 1917 in the Bay of Nanking or something like that. So wherever we put the EW folks, it's not going to be clean yet. You know, like the fires guys, that wasn't clean. When the intel guys kind of took a real big focus on cyber, it wasn't clean. There may be some false starts. We just need to keep pushing. I think that, frankly, the understanding of the Russian threat in the Ukraine has been a godsend to us and Spectrum warriors in really understanding what a threat is. Because, it's very hard to articulate to Americans that you need to raise arms for something when they're not afraid of something else. Cyber was a big deal, Chinese all over the place and stuff like that, so we had a lot of threats going on, and it was kind of easy to raise that flag. EW, it hasn't been that easy a road. So I guess what I'm saying, you're going to have some false starts. You're going to have some little dead ends here and there. But I see it growing to be just a much more defined capability, even if it falls under cyber.
So, as a panel of women in cyber, I thought it would be good to wrap up just a little bit, try to encourage our young ladies in the middle school and high school and maybe even younger. Why is it we like being in the cyber business, and why should they consider coming into it? So I'm going to start with the youngest and come down the table.
So throughout my career, I've had several joint opportunities. I've worked starting in cyber plans, government, network operations, and now cyber threats. When I first started in school, I changed majors 4 times, refusing to do what my dad told me I needed to do and go into computers. Well, when I finally got there, I found my passion. I found information security and studying the people hacking the wetware, as we like to call it. So the biggest piece of advice I would say is, if you feel like something is interesting or that you have a passion for it, don't let anybody else tell you that you don't fit, or let any challenges to being a part of a group that is male dominated. Gosh, talking about myself is hard.
No, that's awesome.
I've encountered several experiences, and I've been a part of teams that were excellent and very supportive. I've been a part of a team that was very, very combative and didn't want to listen, whether it was because I was a woman or because I was young. But by the time I had some success on that team, I was a part of the team. So live your passion, do what you love to do, and eventually you will find where you fit. That's what I've had the opportunity to do. I currently am in the job that I wanted to do when I started college in this field, and I'm loving it, and I want to continue, and I don't know where I'm going next, but it feels amazing to be able to say I'm living exactly the dream that I had when I started this. So
that's great advice.
Yeah.
Find your passion and run with it. Excellent. Major Rodriguez?
Okay, so I don't think I can follow that very well, because that's it, right? To find something that you really enjoy doing, but then to find a way to do it, right? So I started with a story of failure, but then have since then found folks who can help. Like, okay, I don't get this concept. Can you help explain it to me? Okay, now I do get this, but now I can't troubleshoot this. Can you help me? And then find people who can partner with you along the way. One of the things that I was really excited about, and I see Ms. Ribble in the audience, we got, after last year's panel, Augusta University started a Girls Who Code chapter so that we can, a lot of us can help the next generation of girls feel like this is an accessible thing. This is not just something that I see kids on TV that are boys doing. This is something that I could see myself doing too. So that getting plugged into communities, being able to help other people find their passion and then just pursue it, I really enjoyed, because specifically with cyber, why cyber is my passion, you can create pretty much anything. So over this past weekend, I should have been doing a couple other things, maybe organizing my house a little bit better. I learned SAS so that I could create documents that just had a look and feel that was unified and had icons. That type of thing just motivated me so much, and I showed my husband afterwards. And if you have that type of passion for it, or you know someone who does and they just don't know how to get plugged in, try to help them get plugged in, or get yourself plugged in.
Excellent advice. Dr. Dunkerley?
So I will tell you personally, I am almost singularly motivated by the ability to affect change. And tell me where we have a domain that we've ever had the opportunity to more acutely affect change than in the cyberspace domain right now. So what I would tell you all, and what I would tell any young woman who's interested in approaching this field, if you want to affect change, if you want to get involved in something that you can go home every night and feel good when you lay your head down to sleep about the fact that you are making change in the world right now, this is the place to do it. And go Army.
Oh, excellent. Laurie?
So the future's in good hands. It really is. I go to high school sometimes and recruit for cyber folks and do some of the you talk to the seniors about job fairs and stuff like that. And I always try to sell the Army, and I always try to sell it to young ladies because I like to see young women come in and challenge themselves, and I just had a great time doing it. So I tell them there are ones who come and say, "Ooh, I don't like to get dirty." Well, that's okay. There's an environment where you can be in cyber and EW and not have to get dirty. But if you like to get dirty, you can go down to a BCT and run around and do that. Or I want to be doing policy. There's a lot of policy jobs for cyber, not so much for EW, but some. But anyway, there are jobs across the spectrum for people in cyber. If you want to get muddy and run around with the troops, or if you want to be coding in a dark room someplace, or work in high-level policy, it's a very broad area.
So I want to thank the panel. I think they've done an excellent job. I want to kind of wrap up by saying, just hold it for a minute. Sorry, I shouldn't have thanked them yet. It's clear to me, with all the great folks and the here on the panel and in the room, I recognize so many faces, that the future is bright. I'm not at all worried about it. You guys have got it. And I encourage all of you to spend some time talking to them as we go up to the Women in Cyber reception at 4:30 to 5:30. Please see the Sienna team over here for beverage tickets. And with that, please help us thank the panel.
So I have a couple of announcements as well. And General Napper, a big thank you to you for putting together this panel. We got each one for their expertise. You never know how they're going to do together, and it's kind of neat to see the rapport between and how the dynamics worked. So just a few announcements. Thank you to our moderator and panel. A final thank you to our reception hosts, Sienna and Walker and Associates. Thank you all for being here today and supporting Women in FCA. And we hope that you'll be able to attend more Women in FCA sponsored events at other FCA international shows. So please keep an eye out for future panels of Women in FCA. As General Napper mentioned, please join us at 4:30 for the Women in FCA and Women in Cyber reception. You can get drink tickets from the folks in the back. We'll have them wave their hands in just a moment. I want to explain, to get to the reception, you're going to go out to the main hallway and turn right. If you turn left, you'll go to the Oglethorpe Ballroom. If you turn right and then take a left, we're going to have directional signage, but you're going to look for the piano bar lobby. And with that, please don't forget to get your badge scan. Bonnie's already in the back scanning some folks. And can we have the folks with the drink tickets raise your hands? There's one over here in the white jacket, Sarah, and Susan in the black. And we will look forward to seeing you at 4:30. Thank you so much.